There's the story you hear, and then there's the story behind the veil. I'm NJ, and I don't just tell true crime. I peel back what's hidden. I follow the whispers buried with the bodies, because in every cold case, every strange disappearance, every too quiet town or too clean ending, there's a darker thread waiting to be pulled. Here, we don't just ask what happened, we ask what was meant to be forgotten. This is Behind the Veil. Anaj tells true crime, true stories, strange truths, and the silence in between. Tonight's story comes from St. Mary's, Georgia, a town built on moss, magnolias, and things best left buried. It begins with a wedding, a bell that hadn't rung in 40 years, and a girl who vanished beneath the Spanish moss. The bell at St. Gideon's Chapel had been silent since the storm of '53, when lightning split the steeple and rusted the tower rope to dust. Locals used to say the silence was a blessing, that some things shouldn't be summoned. But on July 12, 1993, at exactly midnight, the bell rang. 3 slow tolls, deep, hollow, final. And just like that, Luisa Torres was gone. She wasn't a guest, she wasn't family. Luisa was a last-minute hire, filling in as a server for the reception at Cypress Plantation. She needed the money. Her car was barely hanging on, and she was trying to save up for nursing school. By all accounts, the night had gone smoothly. The bride was radiant, the guests were drunk, and Luisa? She was seen clearing glasses from the porch just before midnight. By morning, her tray was still there, sitting on the railing like she'd be right back. Her shoes were found by the marble fountain, not tossed, placed, neat, no signs of a struggle. No one remembered her leaving. The police gave it a shrug, said maybe she slipped off into the marsh. Happens. A girl gets restless, disappears. But Luisa Torres wasn't the type to leave anything unfinished. Not her shifts, not her life. Her case never made headlines. No manhunts, no search dogs, just a quiet entry on a small-town missing persons list, and a family left to grieve without answers. The couple moved to Savannah, the chapel stayed closed, and the bell? Silent. Until 30 years later when it rang again. In 2023, a development company bought the old chapel. They planned to turn it into a luxury bed and breakfast. It was good PR, a restoration of sacred space, they called it. But when construction began, the workers hit something. They were stabilizing the foundation above the old crypt and found a body. No casket, no ID, just skeletal remains, wrapped in linen, yellowed with age, curled into a corner like she'd been tucked there in haste. In her hand, a silver wine tag, tarnished but still legible. It read, Luisa. The coroner confirmed it, female, early 20s. Uniform remnants still clinging to her bones, no blunt force trauma, but a healed fracture along the jaw, the kind that suggests it had been broken once and fast, like someone meant to silence her. She wasn't buried, she was hidden. A week later, the bell rang again, same time, same cadence, same chill crawling up everyone's spine. Locals called it a haunting. Some camped out by the chapel, cell phones raised, hoping to catch proof. One woman left a voicemail for the sheriff's office, swearing it wasn't a bell at all. She said it sounded like a woman, like she was inside it, trying to scream. The new pastor at St. Gideon's was a historian by trade. He went digging through the old archives. Most were water damaged, sealed, or long since lost. But one entry stood out, a maintenance ledger, dated July 12, 1993. It read, unauthorized access to crypt after wedding, cleaned. Signed, Rev. Marcus Hale. Hale had passed in 1999, but his name wasn't the only thing left behind. In a dusty storage box at the rectory, they found an unmarked cassette. The label just said private, do not play. But they did. On that tape, You hear his voice, measured, calm, confessing. He says Louisa walked in on something she wasn't meant to see. The groom locked in a moment with someone who wasn't the bride. She threatened to go public, said she'd tell everyone, but the chapel had ears. Reverend Hale said he was asked to intervene, and he did. I gave them a place, he said, where she'd never speak from again. Luisa Torres was reburied in the new cemetery just outside town, this time with her name. Her mother, who'd never stopped lighting a candle every year on July 12th, was there to see, and the bell, it hasn't rung since. Some ghosts seek vengeance, others just want to be remembered. This was Midnight Rings, a southern story of silence, sin, and sound, from behind the veil, where even rusted bells know when to speak and for whom to toll. Because if justice is slow, who rings the bell when no one else will? The girl in the pew. From behind the veil, where the past isn't buried, only misfiled. Tonight, we travel to Hamtramck, Michigan, a town folded inside Detroit like a secret prayer. Once vibrant with Polish hymns and factory shifts, now mostly boarded windows, faded murals, and the slow echo of what used to be. And in that echo, one man kept the church doors open, just long enough for someone to come home. The conservatorily retired. At Our Lady of Sorrows, he still arrived every Sunday before dawn, lit the candles, swept the pews, sat quietly as the stained glass turned morning light into ghosts across the floor. And every Sunday he saw her. Back pew, right corner, soaking wet, a little black girl in a drenched white dress, her shoes squeaking on the stone. She never blinked, never fidgeted, just stared straight ahead like she was waiting for someone who never came. And when he tried to approach her, she vanished. Not ran, not turned. Gone. When Philip told the priest, they brushed him off. Said he was exhausted, old, that he'd done enough. Go home, deacon, they said. Rest. But Philip didn't back down. I gave my life to her, he said, whoever she is. They insisted there was no record of a girl, no baptism, no group home visit, nothing. And the Dylans, they told him, hadn't been part of the parish since 1984. But Philip knew what he'd seen. That girl's been in that pew every Sunday since Lent, he said, and someone needs to remember her name. So he did what the living rarely do for the dead. He looked harder. Philip visited the Hamtramck Public Library, poring through group home records, hours of microfiche, smudged folders, nothing, until a retired clerk, quiet, watchful, approached him. She said some homes paid to have their files shredded, but she kept copies. Just in case anyone ever came looking, she said. She handed him an envelope. Inside, a grainy black and white intake photo. Date, June 1997. Name, Santana Marie Dillion, 11. Her intake notes read, runaway tendencies, placed under observation after self-harm attempt, Catholic. That was her, no doubt. She came from a group home called Mother Magdalene House, run by the church, tucked behind a chain-link fence on the east side. It had been closed down after a funding gap in 2002. Santana's file was the last entry before the shutdown. When Philip brought the photo and documents to the Archdiocese, they stonewalled, denied the girl existed, denied the home existed, told him to leave, told him to forget. But Philip wasn't interested in silence. That Sunday he returned to the church, alone, candles lit, doors locked. He waited, and she came, drenched, silent, staring. Philip knelt in the aisle and whispered, Santana, do you want me to find you? For the first time she moved. She lifted her hand, pointed toward the altar, and vanished. Behind the altar, beneath a warped floorboard softened by years of rot, Philip found a rusted tin box wrapped in wet cloth. Inside, five photos of missing girls, a handwritten letter signed with the initials SD, and an old parish logbook inked in red, names crossed out, confessions erased. One line was circled. Confession means nothing when there's no one left to hear it. Before he could deliver the box to police, Our Lady of Sorrows caught fire. Officials blamed faulty wiring, but the altar collapsed. The pews burned. Everything turned to ash. Almost everything. Philip had already made copies, and so had the librarian. A local news report later mentioned newly surfaced documents, one suggesting a decades-long cover-up tied to the foster system, the church, and dozens of missing youth. The parish hadn't just lost faith, it had buried truth. Philip Lockland passed away 3 months later in hospice, peaceful, unshaken. On his bedside table, Santana's photo, still laminated from the library copy machine. And every Sunday since, someone lights a candle at the church ruins, and sometimes a single child-sized footprint appears beside it. Invisible children don't stay silent forever. They wait, in pews, in photos, in memory. This was The Girl in the Pew, a story of faith, fire, and one girl who refused to be erased. From Behind the Veil with Eanaj, where forgotten truths still speak, even if you have to sit in silence to hear them. Subscribe, share, and remember, history isn't always what's written. Sometimes it's what survives the flames. Her voice on the wire, told by Queenie. You ever hear a voice you can't explain? One that shouldn't be coming from anywhere, let alone an old phone line disconnected decades ago? I didn't believe in that kind of thing either. Not really. But something happened in Havre de Grace, Maryland, a little harbor town where the Susquehanna River flows into the Chesapeake Bay, that made me question what exactly it means to be gone. There's a woman named Evelyn Moore. She's 85 now, used to be a switchboard operator back in the day when women in crisp uniforms sat in oak-paneled rooms, plugging wires into blinking lights and making sure people got connected. That was her life for years, connecting voices. She started working young, maybe 19, at the Chesapeake and Delaware Exchange, right there in Havre de Grace. That switchboard saw everything. Mothers calling their kids in for dinner, steamboat captains checking weather reports, and the usual gossipy stuff. Evelyn was good at it, sharp, polite, quiet. But there's one call she never forgot. A teenage girl named Felicia Snyder said she was in danger, begged for help, then click, the line went dead. No one ever found out what happened to Felicia. One moment she was helping her father with the fishing boats near the riverbank. The next, nothing. The year was 1939. The police chalked it up to a runaway. But Evelyn always knew something wasn't right, something about the desperation in that girl's voice, and it haunted her for more than 80 years. Fast forward to 2023, just last year. Evelyn had long since retired. The telephone exchange closed in the 70s, and that old switchboard got packed away and forgotten. But on some quiet, restless evening, she found it again, up in the attic, buried in a dusty crate, and for reasons she couldn't even explain, she brought it downstairs and set it next to her bed. Cleaned it up, plugged it into her landline. She told me, I don't know why I did it. I just felt like it still had something to say. And then in October, she started getting calls again from Felicia. The first one came in late, almost midnight. The switchboard chimed the way it used to, even though the mechanics inside it were long dead. Evelyn picked up the phone, thinking maybe she was just tired, maybe it was a wrong number. But then came the voice, faint, trembling. "Miss Moore, I'm lost." Evelyn froze. It was Felicia. Same voice, same tone, same urgency. And Evelyn knew there's no way this was a prank. Felicia was calling her again. From where? She didn't know. All she could do was listen. Felicia whispered, "Please, I'm scared. He's coming for me." Then, static. The line went dead, just like in 1939. That's when Evelyn started digging. She went back through her old newspapers, tracked down yellowing clippings, visited the Historical Society. The police file on Felicia's case was thin, barely a paragraph. Said she went missing after helping her father unload the boats. No suspects, no leads, just gone. But local whispers told a different story. People had always said Felicia's father was a hard man, the kind who didn't take well to being disobeyed. Neighbors said they heard screaming the night she vanished. Her shoes were found on the riverbank, white Mary Jane's, soaked and scuffed, but no blood, no body, just those shoes. It was like she walked into the water and disappeared. Evelyn even found one of the last people still alive from the original search party. A woman named Agnes Devlin lived out near the canal. When Evelyn said Felicia's name, Agnes's eyes filled with tears. She said, "We looked for her for days, never found a thing, but I swear, a year later, a fisherman said he saw her walking down by the docks. Her dress was wet and her hair was down to her waist. He called out, but she vanished." After that first call, Felicia didn't stop. Evelyn kept getting the same voice on the wire, always around midnight, always frightened. "I'm trapped," Felicia said. "He won't let me leave." One night, Evelyn answered the door and found no one there. But hanging from her porch light was a scrap of paper, faded, almost like parchment. It read, "Kids are safe, she's not." That was something Felicia had said once, back in 1939, during a brief radio broadcast a hobbyist recorded and donated to the Chesapeake Museum. The recording still exists. You can hear it if you ask the right person. Felicia's voice saying, "Kids are safe, she's not." Evelyn started putting the pieces together. She visited the museum herself, asked to hear the old radio disc. It was brittle, barely playable, but the sound was unmistakable. Felicia was speaking to someone, anyone, saying, "If you hear me, find Mary." Mary Thompson. Another girl who went missing a year before Felicia, 17. Last seen at a dance pavilion near the water. Her body turned up in the river too. The coroner said drowning, said she was drunk. But Felicia knew better. In that recording, she said, "He caught her. Nobody knows." Nobody listened. Evelyn became obsessed, not out of madness, but because she felt a responsibility. She said, "If I don't find the truth, no one will." She started retracing Felicia's last steps, talked to a local historian who showed her microfilm from 1939. Apparently, on the morning she disappeared, Felicia told her classmates she was going to meet someone at the old lighthouse. Said she was going to leave a note for Mary. The lighthouse had been shut down for a decade by then. No lights, no caretakers, just a hollow shell on Concord Point. But it was still standing. So, Evelyn, this elderly woman with arthritis and a bad hip, drove there on a cold November night. Took the switchboard with her, said she needed to try. Maybe, just maybe, she could hear Felicia one last time. Maybe even help her. She climbed the hill with the switchboard in a canvas bag and entered the lantern room. The place was barely holding together, but she set the board on a crate, ran a line from it to the rusted metal spar where the light used to be, and waited. Then, 3 chimes. The same ring from 1939, the same one Felicia had always used. "Miss Moore," the voice came. "I'm here, he's in the darkness." And then she said something new. Something that chilled Evelyn to the bone. "Don't trust Father Ravenwood. He took Mary first." Now, Father William Ravenwood was the same man who led the search party when Felicia went missing, the same man who comforted grieving families, who baptized children and led Sunday sermons. But Evelyn remembered something else, something small. In one of the old news clippings, it said Felicia had visited the church office twice that week before she vanished. No one knew why. And then the final call came. One night, Evelyn answered, and Felicia's voice was clearer than ever. She said, "It's not just me, there are others. We're still here under the river." Evelyn asked her where exactly. There was silence, then under the nets. The next day, local police received an anonymous tip about a sunken cellar hidden beneath the old Snyder fishery, which had long since collapsed into the riverbank. Divers went in, expecting nothing. They found remains, multiple skeletons, teenagers, mostly. One of them, they believe, was Mary Thompson. Another, though never confirmed, may have been Felicia. No charges were filed. There was no living suspect. Ravenwood had died decades earlier. The Snyder family line ended in the 60s. But the voices stopped after that. No more midnight calls, no more whispers. Evelyn doesn't speak about it much anymore, but sometimes when the wind's just right and the river is quiet, she says she still hears the faintest echo, a girl's voice, saying thank you, her voice on the wire. By queenieEanaj? Yeah! You ever meet someone who speaks in poetry? Like everything they say was already written down somewhere. In a journal they burned years ago just to forget. Silverton, Oregon. A place soaked in silence and wet air. Rain doesn't flood the streets here, it lingers. Soft, misty, like grief that never fully dries. That's where Max Marlita lived, alone, in a weather-worn craftsman house at the end of Juniper Lane. Chipped porch paint, dead porch light, and one bedroom that was always dark. You know the kind, where time doesn't move forward, it just settles. They called him the widower poet, a quiet man with a loud past. Max hadn't written much since his wife, Caroline, was found dead in that house 2 years ago. The town said it was a break-in gone wrong, case closed in 3 weeks, filed away like last year's snow. But Max never believed that. He said it felt staged. And if you read the poems he wrote after she died, you'd start to believe him. The man had a gift. His verses didn't just describe things, they predicted them. After Caroline, the poems turned dark. No more love sonnets, no more metaphors for spring. Just death. In rhyme, like the one about a girl in a red coat. He wrote it on a Monday. By Thursday, Maddie, a teen who always walked her dog by the river, was found dead beneath the same tree Max had described. Same red coat, same time of day. Then came The Mechanic, a poem about 3 bolts loosened and an arm that won't rise. 2 days later, Carl Blake, owner of the local auto shop, was crushed under a lift that should have held. People whispered. Waitresses said his writing was cursed, that Max wasn't writing stories, he was writing warnings. And Max, he kept writing, like the words weren't his, like they came through him, not from him. Then came Samantha, not from Silverton. She drove in from Salem, said she was a librarian. Thin, sharp-eyed, the kind who reads footnotes like they're plot twists. She tracked Max down, showed up on his porch with a weathered copy of his earliest work, the love poems, the ones he'd written for Caroline. a spiral-bound book titled The Window Between Us. Samantha said she found something. She flipped to a page and pointed. Look here. Third line of every poem Caroline wrote. That letter, it's slightly darker, not by much, but enough. Max squinted, and he saw it too. Letters bolded so faintly they seemed accidental. At first he thought it was just bad printing, or maybe Caroline being theatrical. But now it looked like code. Samantha had lined up every bolded letter from those third lines. One by one, they spelled names. The first? Nolan, Sheriff Nolan, the same man who responded first the night Caroline died, said the door was kicked in, said it looked like a robbery. But Max remembered, no real struggle, no mess. Just Caroline in the hallway, cold, silent, a single drawer open in the kitchen, nothing missing. And here's the thing, Nolan had a key, small-town habit. He'd once fed their cat while they were away. Max and Samantha kept decoding, poem by poem, each name spelled out like a soft-spoken accusation. A teacher, a florist, a neighbor who'd stopped waving 6 months before Caroline's death. All connected, all people Caroline had been quietly distancing herself from. Then they found the final poem, not published, not even typed. It was folded into the back of her favorite book, Tennyson's In Memoriam. It read, "The window cracked on April's breath, a copper song, a flowered death. But in the glass, the truth stood still, the man she loved, the one who'd kill." Samantha froze. For a moment, she thought Caroline was naming Max. And Max, he wondered too, because he didn't remember much that night, just whiskey, a fight, then silence, then Nolan standing over him. But then Samantha flipped the paper over. On the back, a map, coordinates drawn in delicate strokes, a hidden trail deep in Silver Falls State Park, a place only Max and Caroline would have known, one of their old hiking spots. They went, together, through mist and pine, down winding trails the locals had forgotten, the kind of place where sound feels sacred, where grief has room to breathe. Then Max saw it, a rusted tin box, buried beneath the roots of an old pine. Inside, Caroline's necklace, a journal, pages swollen with rain and truth. It was hers. The entries told the real story of fear, of being watched, of Nolan showing up uninvited, of calls in the night, of being dismissed by the chief, by the system, by the church. The final entry stopped mid-sentence. If this gets to Max, tell him the window isn't broken. It's just, then nothing. Samantha brought the journal to state authorities. DNA testing confirmed it. Fibers from Nolan's uniform were found to Caroline's fingernails. He'd been there. He'd never left. He just rewrote the story. Nolan was arrested within the week. He said nothing, just stared at Max through the glass of the interrogation room. Cold, blank, like silence trying to smother a flame. The town apologized. They always do after the lie unravels, but Max didn't care. He wasn't writing warnings anymore. He was writing peace. The last poem he ever wrote, he didn't publish. He folded it into a library return book and gave it to Samantha. It read, "Where sorrow stands, the wind may blow, but truth will plant its seeds below. And love, though buried in the frost, blooms brighter still when all seems lost." Max still lives at the end of Juniper Lane. He doesn't cover the windows anymore. Sometimes neighbors say they see him standing at the glass reading aloud. Sometimes they hear whispers in the rain. Me? I think some people carry the dead with them, not in chains, but in verse. And if you're quiet long enough, you'll hear them too. You've been listening to Behind the Veil with queenieEanaj. This was The Widower's Window. If the truth moved you, whisper it forward, because silence, it never stays empty. St. Mercy's Hollow, told by queenieEanaj. Let me tell you about a place tucked deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, Harlan County, Kentucky. Now, these hills, they've seen their share of sorrow. Coal built the towns and silence buried the sins. But nothing quite haunts me like the story of St. Mercy's Asylum. The locals just call it the Hollow now. See, St. Mercy's was built back in 1952 by a group of nuns, the Sisters of St. Mercy, who said they wanted to care for women deemed unfit for society. But it wasn't a place for healing. It was a place where women disappeared. I'm talking about unmarried pregnant girls, rebellious wives, poor mountain girls who didn't follow the rules, anyone who scared the town's image. And by 1968, the place shut down overnight. No notice, no explanation. The sisters vanished, the records disappeared, and the women, most were never seen again. Nobody really talked about it after that, until a young grad student named Kyle Kendricks went missing up there. Kyle was from Harlan. He grew up hearing whispers about the Hollow. He was studying Appalachian folklore at the University of Pikeville and thought he'd poke around the asylum ruins for a project. In early April, he packed his truck with a camera, a notebook, a recorder, and drove up the ridge road to the asylum. His last recording said, "I'm going in. There's something here nobody wants us to see." And then, silence. 2 days of search and rescue, helicopters, dogs, volunteers, turned up nothing. Only his backpack was found, hanging from a roof beam in a shed behind the asylum. His favorite ball cap was beside it, soaked like it had been dipped in a stream. No signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Just gone. His sister, Tracy Kendricks, wasn't having it. She was just 2 years older than Kyle, and they'd always been close. When the search was called off, she flew in from Lexington. She told me she listened to the last recording Kyle made and swore she heard a woman's voice, sobbing, chanting, pleading for mercy. But when she brought it to the local deputies, they told her it was probably wind echoing off the walls. Tracy didn't buy that, so she started digging. First through the county courthouse, then into the archives. That's where she found something strange, a misfiled box labeled 1955 to 1962 patient census. It listed dozens of women, most admitted for so-called moral delinquency or being unmanageable. Next to their names wasn't a discharge or a transfer, it said sold. Now no one could explain that word. No destination, no follow-up documents, just sold. Tracy dug deeper. She found a letter from a woman named Agnes Mullins, written in 1961. Agnes said she'd been shipped to a private care facility in Cincinnati and begged whoever found the letter to remember them. She signed it AM, no eyes to see me. That line haunted Tracy, and me too, if I'm honest. Eventually, her search led her to an old contractor, William Ellsworth. He worked on St. Mercy's before it closed. Tracy tracked him down and he admitted he'd been hired to fix a boiler in '67. Said he only went inside once, and what he saw, women with blank stares, hollow eyes, sitting in silence. He said he didn't ask questions, just left and never went back. But Tracy had proof that Ellsworth had signed off on some strange blueprints that showed hidden tunnels under the asylum, maintenance shafts that led out to a wooded ridgeline far from the main road. And when she finally got into his old workshop, she found a locked cabinet. Inside, handwritten ledgers, names, dates, and the word purchased. Opposite each name, a price. 3 women, 1960. Tracy confronted Ellsworth. He said, "I swore an oath to the town's families. The sisters kept order. The coal bosses were good customers." Then, just like that, he burned the ledger. She wasn't done. Her next stop was Dr. Martha Wesley, a child psychologist in Harlem whose father had been the superintendent at St. Mercy's. Dr. Wesley tried to downplay it all, said the word sold was probably a clerical error, maybe meant transferred. But eventually she admitted there were women sent out of state. Not to other hospitals, but to contractors, private ones. She told Tracy the record stopped in 1962. Someone didn't want the story told. And then she looked Tracy in the eye and said, Kyle's disappearance might be psychosomatic. A fixation, mountain air playing tricks on her. But Tracy found one more thing. A yellowed newspaper clipping from 1965. It told of a sheriff's deputy who found 5 skeletal bodies in a burned-out shack deep in the woods. 5 women in what was described as institutional attire. Cause of death? Carbon monoxide poisoning. They were never identified. That was the final push. Tracy returned to St. Mercy's Hollow one last time. Dusk was falling. She found the tunnel entrance buried under ivy. The latch was rusted, but it gave way. She slid inside with a flashlight. The air was cold, thick. The floor sloped downward. She told me, her voice shaking, she heard footsteps behind her, like a line of women, shackled, moving in rhythm. Every time she turned, there was nothing, but the air behind her felt full. At the end of the tunnel, she found a brick wall. Old, the mortar scratched, deep gouges like fingernails had torn at it. Desperate, she pressed her hand to it and said she felt warmth, like someone had just been there. Tracy never found Kyle. His camera, his recorder, gone. But every year on April 8th, she returns to that ruined asylum and lights a single candle at the front gates. She says it's for the women and for her brother, in case he's still listening. People in Harlan still won't talk about St. Mercy's. They say the Hollow is cursed, unstable, dangerous. But Tracy believes those women weren't just forgotten, they were erased, bought, sold, and buried in silence. And maybe Kyle got too close to a truth that someone, alive or not, never wanted uncovered. So when folks warn you not to go poking around those broken down buildings off Ridge Road, listen, because St. Mercy's Hollow may be abandoned, but it ain't empty. And that's the end of this series of Behind the Veil, where we dig deep into the shadows and bring you the truths that were never meant to surface. If this story left you speechless or screaming at your phone, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with my listeners around the world. Got a theory, a reaction, a similar story? Tell me. You never know what might become the next episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a moment of mystery, madness, or revelation. Every click helps this channel grow and keeps these stories alive. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your heart guarded, and remember, some truths only live behind the veil.